the average startup and mid-sized device company, they don't have the massive budgets and armies of people to, you know, put together hundreds of spreadsheets and thousands of man and woman hours of reviewing and things like that. So, our technology was kind of born out of that need.
Well, hey, Ethan, welcome to the show. How are you?
Good, man. It's nice to be here. I'm glad we could finally connect and have a good conversation. I know your life's been busy.
Yeah, a little upended, new baby here, but we're
Yeah.
here. A little sleep deprived, but we're here.
Yeah, you look fine. You look fine.
Thanks.
And I don't hear anything in the background. So
Awesome.
it's gonna be a
Cool
good
deal.
day.
Yeah, it is. So I'm excited about talking about like the regulatory compliance and kind of bringing things to market. But before we do all that, tell us a little bit about yourself, about Site Medical, and kind of what brought you to what you're doing now.
Yes. It's an interesting story. I would definitely categorize myself still, even after, 7, 8 years of doing this, as a outsider to the regulatory and really even healthcare space. I'm a software engineer by trade, through university, and I spent a lot of years building apps, consumer apps, financial technology, that kind of stuff. And my both of my parents, funny enough, are in the healthcare space. My mother has a practice; she's a speech pathologist, and so she's kind of in your world. And my
Yeah.
father, he was the one who was deeply into regulatory, so he did a lot of drug and device approvals for, 100 years. So he was the one that kind of alerted me to a potential opportunity, because he knew that I was the type of opportunistic entrepreneur, meaning I don't the industry didn't really matter as long as there was an interesting, juicy problem that could be solved with technology and innovation.
Yeah.
And so he brought to me the European regulations, which MDR, IVDR, when those were first released, all those years ago, he read them and said, "Oh man, this is going to be incredibly disruptive for a lot of companies that are either selling or intend to sell in Europe." And when we really
Yeah,
got
and
into the weeds, yeah.
just for people that might not know, what are those two acronyms? Because those are the two regulations that hit from through the EU, right?
Oh, yes, it's just the European medical device
Okay.
regulation and in vitro diagnostics regulation. So devices are the physical stuff. In vitro is more lab-based things like an antibody or something like that, right? Something you could use in a petri dish. Um, so those are the rule that's the equivalent of FDA compliance in Europe. If you want to sell in the European Union, you have to now comply with MDR. And it's more, overall, it's more strict. And the release of this reg, everything in Europe is a little bit harder to do compliance wise. And it has caused a lot of companies to they just have to do more work, especially on the research side. So they need to come with more data, which is a little bit of a contrast to how the FDA does things. So for devices, so that's kind of how we got started. Is we saw that it was going to be a huge challenge. The the average startup and mid-sized device company, they don't have the massive budgets and armies of people to, you know, put together hundreds of spreadsheets and thousands of man and woman hours of reviewing and things like that. So, our technology was kind of born out of that need, knowing that as these companies start to comply, they're gonna be in trouble. They're not going to be able to get the work done. And if you can't get approved, you can't sell, which
Yeah.
is a problem for startups, right? It's a problem for anybody. But so that's kind of how I got into the industry, and ever since then, that's been kind of fallen in love with the healthcare space, and even within that, regulatory, the compliance world. There's just an infinite amount of things that can be improved, and the more I learn about it, the more I see the opportunity for it to drive a real impact, especially on the mid and smaller sized companies. Otherwise, they just get choked out. So,
Yeah.
innovate or die in a sense, not to be too dramatic.
Yeah,
But
no, I think it's
yeah,
super, super valuable to kind of have that perspective because I think at least a lot of the people that I'm talking to, they're smaller, maybe they're technology or device or software companies, and they're early in their stages, and they're looking at like this long road of what it takes to be approved. And I mean, in some cases, it's tens of thousands of dollars. It's like you said, a lot of man hours. It's a lot of reporting. It's a lot of compliance work. I guess so. Prior to some of these regulations coming into place, what was there when it came, like if somebody had a device they wanted to sell, was it kind of a free for all game, or was there like a maybe an arbitrary level of regulation that just got kind of layered on over time, more and more onerous, or kind of what's been the development of that?
it there's been a shift, especially in Europe. There's been a shift towards structure, basically collecting more data. That's really what
Yeah,
it boils down to. And previously, you could just kind of say, like, here's my device. Here's two or three other devices this is basically the same thing as, right? We make it the same way. It's supposed to function the same way. It looks the same, etc. Therefore, if these guys are approved, my
we
stuff
should be
should be
approved.
too.
Yeah,
No problem. That logic allows for a lot of simple devices. I mean, the majority of medical devices are simple things, right?
yeah,
Your catheters, your gloves. I mean, and that makes it really easy because you could say, look, we've been making this thing for 20 years. So have these other people. It's fine. And that generally was okay. The new philosophy is you can't really do that anymore. You have to show more data. So either you have to run tests on your thing, or you have to go out in the world and look at everybody else's tests of the same performing type of device and use it to make a more structured argument. And that's fine. It makes sense. It's safer in a way. It's more due diligence, but it's a hell of a lot more time.
yeah,
And if you're a startup, your costs, your first seed round of several $100,000, you don't want to spend that just on your submission. You want to make the
yeah,
thing. So yeah, your costs going from you could get it done for under 50K to now you're not getting out the door for less than 150. It's significant for an early stage venture. And you don't even know if you're going to
make it.
gather
Yeah,
enough data to get it approved in the first place, which is scary, right? It just amps up the risk.
yeah,
So that's the big shift. It's not like it was the Wild West before, but it certainly was easier. And for all of your US audience that's kind of thinking, oh yeah, Europe's it's a decent market to sell in. If they're trying to decide between the two, unless your funding is really substantial, you're probably going to want to pick whichever market you have a strategic
advantage in.
marketing
Yeah.
advantage in. It might be Europe, even if you're a US company, it might be, but it's generally going to cost you more. It's going to be tougher for now.
Yeah. Well, when you first said data, I was thinking I was going in a totally different place. You're talking like in order to get these things approved now, you need data that shows, safety, validity, efficacy, or whatever for this device.
You're clinical.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was
Yeah.
thinking
Yeah.
like, what about all these, like as consumer technology becomes more and more um not medical, but like the line between what is a medical device and what is a consumer technology piece of, equipment is getting more and more blurred, right? Like I've got a Garmin watch, it tells me how I sleep, like it checks my gait pattern or whatever, and all of that can be used by healthcare professionals. So is there like in the market now, like is there this shift to like what kind of data is being collected and at what point does it become something that falls under the maybe the FDA or the European Union equivalent of it? Like I'd imagine that that's kind of something that's rumbling now these days.
There's a lot of pushing of the line,
Yeah,
right? Because when you think about it, if you're building a product, you want to market it as aggressively as possible. So you want to tell people all of the things it can do for you. And That's fantastic in every industry. The tricky part with the healthcare industry is that there's a line where you cross where if you say, if you use our device, it will do X, Y, and Z to benefit you, your health. If you cross that line and saying, claiming that this, if you use this thing, you're going to be able to treat this disease or you're going to get this benefit for your body in
Yeah.
some way, then that's fine. But the FDA is going to say, okay, but you got to prove that. You have to prove it. If you just say, yeah, it's a fitness watch, it's a, that's it, that's it. We don't know what it does.
Yeah.
You know, you right. If you say something like that, you can get by. But as soon as you start pushing the lines, which everybody wants to, because you need to be competitive,
Yeah.
then you cross the line into, okay, well, how do you prove that? How do you prove that it benefits you long term? If you're going to claim that it helps people live longer, then you have to prove that it works. And that's where startups can get in trouble because people that are generally doing the marketing, they see the features and the benefits and they know them intuitively because they use the product, but they are confused as to when do we cross the line into now we have to prove it. We have to actually test this thing on people and do it in a way that FDA is going to like and accept.
Yeah. Now I'm assuming, like you mentioned it earlier, like this doesn't necessarily need to involve the startup or the device going out and like funding their own research or funding their own studies to prove it. They can pull, literature reviews and look at, past peer reviewed studies and kind of make the argument. What I guess what are best
Mm.
practices for that? Because I'm assuming that, I mean, that in and of itself requires manpower and having probably somebody with some letters after their name to publish this thing or put it together in a way that's structured, that not only makes the claims sound good on paper but is actually like valid in like the literature sense, if you're talking research and stuff like that.
Right. That's ultimately it boils down to the big question is, do we need to fork over the cash and run our own studies, or can we, you know, get away with not doing
Yeah.
that, which nobody wants to run their own studies. That's most of the conversations we have are around that realm, which is we have this product. Is there enough clinical data in existence that that's what our company does. And that's what our software product helps people do. Like, can you compile enough research to make the claim, to support the claims for your own device? And for most devices that are not groundbreaking technology, which most medical devices aren't, right?
Yeah.
That's doable. You just have to do it in a systematic way, exactly like you said. You don't need a PhD or an MD to do it, but it needs to be somebody with experience that their CV is going to be respectable. So you can't just have your marketing folks search around on Google Scholar and,
Yeah.
say, hey, we found a couple articles. It worked here. Should be fine. So you have to take it in a little bit more of a scientific research based approach. And like you said, it's man hours. It's pain um, to organize the literature, keep it updated,
Yeah.
analyze it, that kind of thing.
And what is the final product of that? Is that like a report that goes to the regulatory body, or is it a paper or that they're trying to publish somewhere? Like you do all the work,
Yeah.
or is it just in like a database? And if somebody starts poking around, kicking the bushes from the FDA or something, they can say, "Oh, well, we've got this data here, and you can see it."
It gets submitted to the regulatory body really in both cases. You don't have to publish it um, publicly. Generally, because a lot of times it will also include some data that you've collected on your device internally, right? Even
Yeah.
if you're not running a big study, you've tested it somehow. You've done some level of internal data gathering that's still valid that you might not necessarily want to publish to the world. So yeah, the end result is a structured report that lays out in broad strokes. It lays out, what are you claiming your product does? That's the most important thing, right? If you're claiming it cures cancer, you're going to need to back that
Yeah.
up. If you're not claiming much, right? It's a glove, right? It doesn't break and it works. Then the rest of your report is meant to be, here's the evidence we have to support the thing that we're saying our product does. So it's just kind of like show your work. If you reduce the amount of claims, so, which means you can't market as aggressively, then your submission gets easier, right? But your marketing people are a little bit hamstrung in what they can say the product does, and that's the risk and that's the reward trade-off, from the regulatory side, which matters. I think, especially in a startup, a hyper competitive environment, when there's three other competitors that have the same product, but some guys do their homework better than
Yeah.
you, and they can market differently than you, and that's a huge advantage,
Yeah.
depending on the specific products, right?
Yeah. Well, and it could be an advantage in gaining funding too, right? Like if you got a VC firm looking at two different devices and one's gone through everything, like you said, they did their homework, they're in a better position to market. Like it makes it less of a risk for the VC, right? To put their money behind a startup that's done the legwork.
It's a sneaky value add for company valuation. We also do some work on the drug side, and one thing that acquirers and investors look at is they essentially look at the scope of how your documentation is, if it exists and if it's
Yeah.
organized. In drugs, it's related to, okay, how did you run your trials and how did you collect the data? But devices, it's the same concept, right? Um, and if your stuff is a mess, that increases the risk for an investor or an acquirer, because there might be something hidden in the details that you guys missed or, unethically chose to miss.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's a factor on valuation. It's a factor on funding. You know, it's but it's not as sexy. No, people don't want to lead with that. And CEOs and founders that are engineers and are focused on building life-changing technology, that's not really where they want their heads to be anyway. So it tends to be an afterthought, even though it's still risk and it deserves to be considered.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So we kind of got that the basis here. So from a like not to get like too much into the like philosophy about whether or not this should even be happening. I guess because I think there's you could talk to a lot of people. We actually had some folks on the show maybe a couple years ago, and they quoted a book by I can't remember her name, but the title of the book was like "How the FDA Robbed Us from a Golden Era of Medicine" or something like that, and it's all
Oh my
very
gosh.
anti regulation, looking at
Hmm.
like we just need to scrap it. And then you have people on the other side that are like, oh, the FDA isn't doing enough. It needs to step in more. There needs to be more oversight, more regulation, especially, like I said, as some of these consumer devices become more like have more application towards health and wellness and medical care. I guess from what y'all have been seeing in the over the last several years, you've been in this for a while, has there been more of a just a piling on of regulation, or has there been some kind of balancing where some is getting piled on and some is taken off, or is it just kind of just piling more and more onto the pile that these organizations need to kind of comply with in order to bring their devices to market?
I'm gonna have to read that book. I mean, that's a juicy
I know.
title.
Yeah.
Um, but it's the ultimate question is, it's your innovation versus risk,
Yeah.
right? And the truth is, if you wanted the fastest moving society in terms of innovation, you would have no regulations and it would just be build whatever you want, go for it. That comes at the price of increased risk, which means more people can get hurt. Uh, Europe they've always kind of taken this path of they're always
More
adding, they're never
conservative.
reducing. And that's part of the reason why we find this industry so engaging, is because it's an uphill battle. It's not, oh well, in 10 years they're going to repeal all this stuff
Yeah.
and
It's gonna
things are going to get
sunset. Things are
easier.
gonna go away.
There's going to be no more challenges for us to try to optimize. Like, it's never that. It's just it's a steady increase. So I would say, for people complaining about FDA for devices, check out Europe, and you'll feel a lot better about your prospects. But I guess to answer your question in general, I think it's always going to be increasing in a thoughtful way. I'm not one of those people that really wants to harp on FDA. I think comparatively, if you look at the other organizations globally, they actually do a pretty good job. Um, so I don't want to throw too much blame on them.
Yeah.
I mean, you have to have some level of, if you want to guarantee more patient safety, which is the whole reason why we do this, you have to have some level of checking in, right? You have to have some level of diligence. It's just people will abuse it.
Yeah.
And the flip side to that is that most of the companies and devices that we work with, that we help them with FDA or we help them in Europe, I would say almost all of them, over 90% of them are not. You take one look at the device and their data, and you're like, this is not going to be a risk.
Yeah.
This is not an issue. And
Yeah.
yet they're burdened with potentially six figures of costs to prove that the device that they've been selling already is still compliant and good. Um, that's where we take our issue. And I would say that, but instead of whining about, okay, there should be more regs or less regs, I just think that there's such a wealth of clinical data that exists in the world on these devices. I think we just need to get better at processing and interpreting it,
Uh-huh.
which is where
Yeah.
our passion lies. So we could whine about the new European regs about they have to do more research, et cetera, or we could just get better at doing the research. Like let's just innovate in terms of our due diligence processes the same way we're committed to innovating with bringing new technologies to market. Why are we still in the stone ages of doing stuff on paper to prove
Yeah.
our products are safe? It's ridiculous. So let's just get better at it. That's how I see it.
No, I love that. That's such a great way to look at it. Like you hear, it's very easy to be like, oh, this big bad, FDA, EU, whatever it is. They're always putting it
Keeping
down
me
to the little
down.
guys. They're always doing whatever, and like you can innovate your way out. That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's great. I was thinking of like I've been dealing with a little bit over the last couple of years devices like you said that have been like maybe in the consumer space. They've had a really good run in the health and wellness space. They see they have applications towards medical and now they're trying to make the shift.
Yeah.
Companies like that, like you said, now they have this extra layer of burden or a layer of proof that they need to show now in order to get approved as a medical device. Are companies like that in a better position than companies that have say just started? Maybe it's a similar device or similar technology, but they haven't been selling yet. They're just going to go out of the gate to try to get approved and get the paperwork filed and the literature review done. Like which pathway is the one of least resistance?
Oh, okay. So you're talking about like, should we launch kind
Yeah,
of doing
should we
this thing in one
launch?
shot, or should we kind of
Yeah,
backdoor in through consumer?
yeah. Because the entrepreneur in me is like, let's get cash in the door, let's start getting some sales, and then at that point, let's maybe make the shift into the medical device market. And then I deal with some people that are like, oh, we're just going to start right out the gate. We're going to put it all our eggs in this basket, and then we'll kind of build them out parallel, consumer device and medical device.
I think it has. I think it depends on your philosophy as an entrepreneur. I think that's really where it boils down to, because I can see both sides. The compliance first side is nice because you can raise a whole pile of money on the promise of
Yeah,
delivering, right? That's what most biotech startups, they raise a whole bunch of money before they even do the trials, right?
yeah,
And they continue to do that and continue to do that, and then hopefully they get approval. Whereas, in the device world or the software world, especially, you don't need to do it that way. So I would say it depends on your clout in terms of raising money. I don't think that commercially, I don't think commercially that it's going to affect you too much unless you have this really life-changing claim that you think you can make.
yeah,
I think that overall, the consumers, for most health tech type stuff, I think it's better to let the users be the judge of if it's helping them and if it works. And to me, that word of mouth kind of startup referral network marketing is far more powerful than you being able to claim on your site that this thing does this, right? If I'm your friend and you tell me about an app that, does a better job with my sleep, right? I'm going to trust your opinion on it and I'm going to try it. I'm not going to say, well, yeah, but where's the clinical literature on that? I
Yeah.
haven't read anything from these guys, right? You're gonna trust me. So I think depending on your tech, obviously your robotic controlled surgical arm is not gonna
Yeah.
you're not gonna be able
It
to
doesn't
put
fall
that
into
out
that
there.
category. Yeah.
That's not gonna fly out there. But for anything that you can do consumer basing, I would say just as an entrepreneur, startup founder myself, we got to make sure that the users like it and it
Yeah.
works. So I wouldn't sweat it. I wouldn't see the regulatory approval and being able to claim the top tier stuff health wise as like it's not your golden ticket. You still, at the end of the day, need to make something that your users continue to use and like. So to me, the product market fit comes first. Um, if you have the user data, it'd probably be easier to raise the 200K you need to then get your filing and take it to the next level.
Yeah.
So I think if you can baby step it without being unethical and hurting people, then you
Yeah.
know I would do that.
Awesome.
Hopefully, no auditors see that because their whole business depends on me saying the opposite.
Yeah. Awesome. Cool deal. Well, we're getting near the bottom of the hour here. So
Yeah,
Ethan, I always end with this. If there's one or two main points you'd want someone to walk away with from the episode, specifically as it relates to, in this case, um, regulatory compliance and bringing devices to market, like what would they be?
I would say my top tip would be don't don't stick your head in the sand on the possible long-term risks of messing this up. And that's not most people that do regulatory stuff, all they're going to say is you need to address this. This is important, blah, blah, blah. We don't take that approach because it's a risk play and startups are risk. So be aware of it. You can choose to ignore it because the payoff might be bigger. In the short to medium term, we think that's an acceptable strategy. It's like anything in business, but do yourself a favor and at least talk to somebody to get an assessment of the potential risks down the line. Don't assume that you're going to be able to get this thing approved for what you say, cheaply and easily when the time comes. Be aware of it. If it's going to be easy, great. If it's going to be a pain, decide how far you need to kick the can down the road. But it's not always there's more flexibility than people think. So I would
Yeah.
say just don't hide from it. Look at it.
All right.
Take one day and look at it. You know.
Awesome. Cool deal. Well, Ethan, thanks so much. Where can people find you? Sitemedical.com. Is there anywhere else they can connect with you or find out more about what
Yes.
you do and your services?
Sitemedical.com is good for our general kind of consulting approval stuff. If you are interested in doing the research yourself, we have recently launched our platform for public use. We've always kept it
Okay.
internal. That's sitemed.io.
Okay.
Or just find me on LinkedIn. We love to connect with people and, send memes back and forth and, hopefully publish a few useful articles around
Yeah.
approvals and literature review and that kind of stuff. So, yeah, we're very active on LinkedIn if you want to connect with me or the company there.
Cool deal. And we'll link to all that in the show notes. So thanks, Ethan. Have a good one.
Yeah, appreciate it, man.